which was Bill Self saw the disadvantage that North Carolina was at because their big boy went down by re-injuring that ankle, which was sad because I think it could have been a different outcome, although I'm going to give Kansas a boatload of credit. They were playing at a slower pace. They obviously weren't nearly as aggressive as we anticipated that they would be, not to mention the fact they only forced 5 turnovers in the first half, and then in the second half they came out like a bats out of hell and forced like 5 turnovers within the first 7 or 8 minutes, went on a 31-10 run for crying out loud. They just showed you what Kansas is all about. They played in the second half the way we anticipated they would play in the entire game, and North Carolina sadly didn't have the depth. I think we looked at their talent and we said, excuse me, they've got some brothers that can play. There's no doubt about that. But they were absent the depth that they needed. They had to rely on their 5. They had Johnson coming off the bench, the brother of Cameron Johnson for the Phoenix Suns. This kid's got potential. I liked he played big time off the bench in the second half, and I give him a lot of credit where it's due. But in the end, what it came down to was Kansas, their pressure, the fact that they applied it to Carolina. Carolina didn't have the depth that they needed. And Caleb Love, who I said coming into this game, he had to have a big game. That was their shot. He only had 13 points. He was running roughshod over everybody throughout the NCAA tournament. In the second half, that was not the case last night. Only finished with 13 points. Had he had a bigger game, I think it would have been a bigger outcome. It's not his fault that they lost, don't get me wrong, but had he had a bigger game, I think Carolina could have pulled this out, but give credit to Kansas for negating that from happening.
You know, Stephen A. and Coach, when I look at Caleb Love's situation, and I'm glad you went there, Stephen A., he had an opportunity late in the game to knock down some buckets, and he missed shots down the way. But also on Hubert Davis' side, this is a big situation for him as a coach. Didn't use his necessary timeouts, and you can speak to that, Coach, because you know timeouts are very valuable. That's why in the National Basketball Association, they use their timeouts. And for whatever reason, North Carolina decided not to when they had the opportunities. They didn't call a timeout to set up the right play down the stretch with Caleb Love. He missed that shot, and then the rest was history at that point.
You do what your habits are. All right? So, like, in the history of North Carolina basketball, Roy Williams wouldn't have called a timeout in that situation. Dean Smith wouldn't have called a timeout in that situation. You might have thought Hubert would because of his NBA pedigree, but you are what your habits are. What do you practice in that situation? You do time and score all the time. And basically, in that situation, obviously, in their ODOs in practice, they don't call timeout. They get it, they go. They have a couple things that they're going to try to do. But you guys mentioned Caleb Love, and some people are kind of hating on Caleb Love right now. The reason they were there is Caleb Love. He makes tough, guarded shots. That's what he did against UCLA. That's what he did against Duke. The same shots he missed yesterday are shots they rode to the Final Four and the national championship game. He is not afraid of the moment.
Hold it, Coach. Hold it, Coach. Let's be real here. First of all, we ain't throwing any shade on Caleb Love. We know
Not
that they're
you.
there because of him.
You guys.
We just talked about last night. Well, even the critics out there, they're not talking about. We know what Caleb Love is capable of doing. We got love for Love. We saw what he does. Last night wasn't one of those nights. That's all. That's all. Ain't a crime. And, you know, he had bigger nights. He certainly had a bigger night in the semifinals against Duke, all right? He had a bigger final in the Elite, and a bigger second half in the Elite Eight. We get all that. But last night, against those monsters of Kansas, okay, you needed him to be the same dude that he had been. And that didn't happen.